Hello and welcome to the Discover History YouTube channel, and today I'm going to take a look at razors and in particular facial hair throughout history. And like all these videos, we're generally keeping it to about 15 minutes, so therefore this is not an in-depth study. A bit of advice: go out and have a closer look if you're interested specifically in this topic. This will give you an introduction like most of these videos do, so a short whistle-stop tour on razors and facial hair. So if you go back in history, it is guessed at the moment, that's all we know, it is guessed that people started shaving or scraping the face very early on in history. Some people actually suggest that maybe even Stone Age people did in the Neolithic and then into the Bronze Age. We will never ever know. But the interesting thing is, if they were doing that, male grooming as such, they would have been using flint, because what you have to remember is right into the end of the Stone Age there was stone being used, and even into the Bronze Age there was still a lot of stone being used. We do know that people like the ancient Egyptians started scraping the face on a regular basis, and they were using all sorts of things, including pumice, to actually rub the hair away, which sounds absolutely horrific. They also used things such as clamshells, and they literally plucked them out of their face, which also sounds quite horrific. But we also know, and this is really lucky, they used bronze razors as well, and they look very much like an axe, so they are wide at the cutting end and then they go down narrow at the bottom. Unfortunately, mine's tucked away at the moment, so I can't show you that one, but they were used literally with oils on the face to scrape the hair away. And the interesting thing is, the Egyptians did it quite a bit. They often also did their hair, and they famously used to wear a wig. Sometimes the wigs were made out of human hair. They also made them out of horsehair. And famously, if you look up Tutankhamun, for example, during the finding of that in the 1920s, they also found wigs in the tomb there, and it was quite a common feature. It kept the hair free of head lice. It allowed you to sleep at night by literally taking your hair off and putting on your wig every single day. We also know that beards were quite important symbols in ancient Egypt, because even when Queen Cleopatra, when she became technically a pharaoh, she actually wore a fake beard, and that was to portray herself as a man, because obviously only men could govern or rule at that time. So it's quite interesting that people were scraping their face that far back in history. But the best people that we know of that actually shaved on a regular basis would have been the Romans. And that's not saying every single person, because we know that at certain times in Roman history, some emperors, for example, had a full beard. And you've only got to look at statues of famous emperors, and some of them do have a full beard and full moustache. So when you have a leader, for example, an emperor that has a full beard, for example, then it's normal for the local population to follow. So you would have had Romans growing a beard and having a moustache. We also know that the ancient Greeks often had beards, and famously Alexander the Great said warriors specifically should shave their face before a battle to prevent enemies from grabbing the beard and throwing people to the ground during unarmed combat. So it's quite interesting, really. But when the Romans or ancient people were shaving, the razors generally look like that one there. Now this one is an iron one, and this is copied from one found on Hadrian's Wall. So this was one that we know actually existed. Obviously it's only a replica. As I mentioned, a lot of these were made out of bronze as well, and you open it up like this. The handle is actually made out of cow's horn, and the blade is literally iron, so it will rust, and it has to be constantly sharpened, and more importantly rubbed onto a strop to actually take away the burrs on the edge, to actually make it a useful device for shaving the face with. There is no way I would use anything like that personally. And that design, a folding blade, was used for many, many years. And in a way, that's the first safety feature, because prior to that, it was literally a piece of metal or a piece of flint, or even, for example, sharpened shell. But by the Roman period, you actually have a handle, so the blade can be tucked away, and that enables you to put it away when it's not being used. That type of blade, that type of razor is often referred to as a straight or open razor. And then when you get to the Victorian period, because so many people are actually being held up and robbed, for example, in the street, they were often renamed in a way as the cutthroat razor because of the term of cutting the throat with a razor, a very useful device for that job. But we're not going to dwell on that with this talk. By the Middle Ages, we often think of people not shaving, for example, but we know they did. Most people would not have shaved themselves. They often went to see a barber, and a barber did everything. As we have said in previous videos, the barber would cut the hair, shave the face, and maybe even amputate a leg, because by the 15th century and definitely into the Tudor period, you have the barber surgeon. They basically did everything. Very few people would shave themselves, which is why, just like we go to a barber shop every now and again, medieval people would have shaved every now and again. Saying that, in some religious orders, for example, monks in monasteries and places like that, it was usually a ritual thing. And even if you think back to ancient Egypt, the priests inside the temples, they shaved. They actually shaved their entire bodies, it was said. But what I've got here is the type of razor that they would have had by the medieval period and into the 16th and 17th century. So here we have a wooden core, as you can see, and then you fold the blade out. And all these, by the way, are extremely sharp. One of the interesting things you will notice is there is no shank. And when I say shank, there is no blunt area opening up into a wide area. I'd show you the comparison in a moment. So what you have to do is open it up fully, fold it back into its handle, and therefore you can use it like that. But you have to be careful because the blade goes all the way along, so there's no way you can grip it all the way down. So that's the style they would have used. And in the early period of shaving, most people would take soap or oils and place it onto the beard and moustache area. But by the medieval period and the Tudor period, you do actually see brushes like this one being used. And this, and in particular the razor there, are actually copied from finds from the Mary Rose. The bristles were usually things like badger bristle or pig bristle, bull bristle, and they're literally stuck into a wooden block, and that would have been used with a soap to actually soften up the hair before you actually start the shaving. We then know a Frenchman by the 18th century, Jean-Jacques Perrot, invented, some people would say, the earliest safety blade. What it actually is where the blade sits into a bit of wood and it's permanently kept out. Very much like that, really. I don't have an example to show you, but the blade is kept sort of there and it has a cover on it. So you literally take it, slide the cover off, and it can be used like that. And that's the earliest feature of trying to make razors much safer. But that's not really until the 18th century. By the start of the 19th century, they are changing again. And that's when you get this style of open or straight razor. Now, here's the comparison that I want to show you. This, once again, is cow's horn, sometimes made of wood and other materials as well. But when we pull this open, you will see this blunt area here, which is the shank part. That does not exist on the earlier razors. Now, I've got to be very careful. There we go. So there is a big difference, and that is designed, once again, or trying to make these things much safer to use. So you fold it out completely, and there's a little bit of a blunt area that you can handle and hold just there. The blade does not go all the way down. If you do have any of these, by the way, be very careful with them. They are extremely sharp. I've got several of them. One that I carry in my World War I equipment, for example, has actually got a nice cover to it as well. And a lot of them did have covers. They were really well looked after. Problem is, they're iron. You do have to constantly sharpen them, and you do have to work them up and down a leather strop to keep the burrs off them. And a lot of them would have gone away to specific sharpening shops where they would resharpen them for you. Once again, when you get to the 18th and 19th century, more people are shaving and it's becoming something that's done in the home. Less people are going, for example, to the old barber shop to get their leg cut off, a tooth extracted, a haircut and a shave all at the same time. It's also the time that you get your standard brushes coming in as well, the ones that we all recognise and sometimes use. But then we take a step further forward in the history of razors and shaving generally, and we turn the clock to 1847. William Henson, a man in Britain, came up with the idea of shortening the blade. So we have something like that, and it was kept in a small wooden handle, and is often described as the first modern razor. It's one that is often described as looking like a gardening hoe, and it was said to really be based on the sort of tools that you use for planing down wood. So you have wood with a tiny little blade attached to it, and it can be used to scrape the face, this time at a set angle, which is often the best way of doing it. And that then leads us on to this style of razor. So this is the first steps into becoming the safety razor. Now, this one comes in a little box, and a lot of them were really well looked after in these little boxes, and it consists of the handle, the holder for the blade, and then you have a blade, and it was usually just one blade. So the way this works is you screw the thing together, making sure you actually attach the blade inside, and the blade is single edged. So you have something that looks like a Stanley knife basically. So the blade's only on one end and it's wide, and these are not disposable. These would have been used again and again and again. I'm going to put that away separately after the video, is probably the safest. But as you can see from the shape of that, that is the shape really that the first inventions of these sort of razors were. They were hoe shaped, you see. You can see why they're often called that. But you've only got one single blade, and they would have been drawn along the face like that. Much safer because you have now got a guard. Now, most people say, who invented the safety razor? It's very difficult to tell because they were happening all at the same time. There's a lot of people coming together and coming up with their own patents. We do know that Frederick and Otto Kampf in New York came up with the first patent for the safety razor back in the 1880s. And really, a lot of people started to copy that design. As I said, that style required resharpening. That little blade I showed you needed constant sharpening. And what we've got in here is an absolutely fantastic device which is specifically used for sharpening the blade. Now, if I can get this out, I'll show you how it works. So what you've got is a place to put the blade. So you sit the blade on there, you clamp it in place with this thing on the top there, and it comes with a tiny little handle that fits on the side, and you turn it around. It's like a sharpening strop, basically. It does everything for you. And you would have had to have used that to keep that blade nice and sharp, and so you could reuse it safely the next time. But it's not really until the 1900s, especially just after the Great War, that you get what we all see is the standard safety razor like you do there. And this has an absolutely fantastic setup of opening it up, placing the blade on, and then closing it down. And once again, you've got the guards that protect the blades, and obviously it gives a nice smooth cut. With that one, you now have two edges to the blade, and they're often kept in nice little holders like that. And we've all seen the blades. They look like that. Slightly rusty, these, but they are, after all, about 100 years old. So once you've got those in place, as time went by, people made them safer, people made them more effective, and then you also get the disposable razors coming along, and therefore you have the famous companies like Gillette or Bic, for example, where you can still get them today. The interesting thing about Bic brought out the first plastic ones that was fully disposable. So not just the blade, but the handle as well. And you could buy, I think I can remember years ago, you could buy big bags with lots of them in their typical Bic colours, which I think was yellow and blue, I think they were originally. And then eventually, as time went by, people started to bring out the razors that were electric, and then you had battery ones, now rechargeable ones. So we've gone a long way from people scraping their face with pieces of flint, pieces of bronze, to then having handles, and then eventually having the famous cutthroat because of the use in crime, and then the development of the hoe and the safety razor. They've come a long way, really. And as we always say at Discover History, we collect all sorts of things, and we like to have things through the ages. Famously, we cover any age from Stone Age to 1950s. So if you want a video, if you want us to do a video on saucepans from the Stone Age to the 1950s, we can. If you want us to do, as we just did, on razors from the Stone Age to the 1950s, we can. We can pretty much cover anything, and as we always say, this is as much your channel as it is ours. So let us know if you want a video on any topic between that period of Stone Age to 50s. Let us know. As we always say, stay safe, stay in, have a good weekend, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye bye.